Welcome to this event, Indigo, the Color of Grief. We have two speakers tonight, Jonathan Foster, Dr. Jonathan Foster, who is the author of a book by that same title, Indigo, the Color of Grief. And he's an author of several books and is a writer and podcaster himself and will be telling you, well, really the purpose here is for him to share his work in this latest book. And then Kat Reeves, who is an ordained minister and interfaith chaplain, is going to be responding to the poetry that Jonathan shares with us and being in dialogue just about the process of grief and navigating through it. And Jared Morningstar is our Zoom host, so he'll be handling any technical issues. But so we'll have some period of some reading, some dialogue, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion to the participant, to you all out in the participant world. So welcome so much, Jonathan Foster and Kat Reeves.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. You guys can hear me okay? Good. All right. Good looking group. Thank you for having me. Yeah, we're going to talk a bit about grief tonight and all the surrounding things that go with it. Grief is like maybe the main note struck, but then for any of you musicians, there's a bunch of inharmonics that happen, like wavelengths that cascade out from that and connect to all kinds of things. And so we can talk about any of that stuff because I know for lots of us, whether you've lost a child or not, like I have, lots of us have gone through loss and really intense stuff. Speaking of that, I want to say up front that I like to say this when I remember. Even if you haven't lost a child, yes, grief is ubiquitous. And we're all kind of dealing with the same kind, it's all kind of interconnected, whether it's the death of a loved one or the death of a relationship, the death of how we thought life was going to go, right? That's kind of the way it is in many respects. Death of a dream. This grief thing, we have common denominators. And so sometimes I recognize, I don't think probably as much with this group. I suspect this group is probably pretty dialed in and self-aware, but sometimes I recognize the reticence, the reluctance to even go there at all because, well, I haven't lost something as intense. Well, the truth is, you never really know what someone else is feeling anyhow, and you really only have your own life. It's your own body and your own heart and mind experience, and if it's bad, it's bad. It doesn't. There's the point I'm trying to say is there's no comparison. So no one gets to compare anything tonight. Probably if you're a human being and you've been around a couple of decades at least, you've probably gone through some pretty bad stuff. So it probably speaks to everyone. So I appreciate being here. I'm always thankful, like Sherry said, and I know she's an author and some of you are as well. Well, Jared, hey, brand new author for Jared. But it's always nice to talk about the work. That's never a problem. It's especially nice to talk about something like this because it's so entangled with, specifically with my daughter. And it's been a big change, obviously. I'm going to read a few chapters, and where I'm going to pick up, and by the way, the chapters aren't long, so you don't have to get nervous. They're only, 2 to 4 pages each. And plus there's a lot of white space in the book, so there's not a ton of words. And that's all done on purpose because it's hopefully going to give the reader, tonight you will be the reader / listener, but hopefully it gives the reader or the listener a chance to kind of process it. All that white space is supposed to help them too. But I'm going to pick up kind of like right after I say in the book that our daughter died, even though I think everyone pretty much knows that going into it. And yeah, I think I just wanted to say, I know it's intense. We're going to jump into it. It's 5 o'clock on the West Coast, so you probably guys are still awake enough to engage and make this happen. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's how I'm going to set it up. And then Kat, we can go however, wherever the spirit leads us here tonight. And I might say, I've noticed when I've done some readings that people wind up, you don't have to do this, but if you capture a phrase and you want to throw it in the chat, or if you just want to write it down and we can return to it later, that'll be fine too. But I'm going to read Shocking. It's a chapter called Shocking, and then Weeks, and then I think Beauty. That's how this is going to go. Shocking to lose something so important. I mean, this wasn't like the remote or keys or even a famous painting. This was something actually priceless. How could this happen? How could someone so full of life lose their kid? How could a kid so full of life be gone? Couldn't wrap my mind around her departure. In the dead of winter, age 20, threshold of adult, threshold of next. Not unlike a spring season for her. So she died full of life and spring in the dead of winter? What the? She had so much life to live. Wait, what was the point? We'd been getting her to adulthood, showing her how, leading the way, shoe tying, piano playing, stick shift driving, 1,000 things. We did it, she observed, then followed. That's the way this works. Kids follow parents. But then she died and the sequence was wrecked. Hurt so bad. Messed up eating, messed up sleeping, messed up eliminating waste, messed up routine, messed up directions to the post office, messed up everything. I'd be talking and words would start acting like little tripwires, connected to little memories, connected to little detonations of sadness. Just normal conversations, dentist or barber or grocery store. Have any kids? Sons? Daughters? How many kids do you have? Next thing I knew, I was slipping behind closed doors, trying not to make a scene in public space, dentist or barber or grocery store. Yeah, just trying to find secluded place to make room for little detonations of sadness. Weeks until the headstone arrived, until the sunshine arrived, March maybe, maybe April, little flames of sprouting green all throughout the cemetery in springtime. In springtime, we went to see the grave marker, to mark her grave with flowers, wife and me. I'll not soon forget intentional way wife knelt, took a breath, and arranged uprooted plants. Way she leaned back on heels, fingers absently gripping fistfuls of grass. Way she snatched a tear with the back of her hand, dirt and moisture creating little patterns of grief on her cheek. Way her hair fell over her face, the way I felt looking at her, how much I loved her, how much I wanted to throw up. I stood close, like a tree providing shade. Strike that. Like a sentinel providing protection. Strike that. I stood close, useless. She arranged and then rearranged as if the spot might be fixed with uprooted plants, as if uprooted lives might be fixed with an arrangement of uprooted plants. I started to say, it doesn't matter. Started to say, nothing matters. But I stopped because something very much started to matter in the way she worked so diligently amid the sadness. And I've thought 5 or 37 or 1,000 times since, what is life if not beauty's pursuit at the edge of the grave? Beauty is a harmony within a melody, within a key signatured by resistance. Beauty isn't the domination of resistance. Beauty is a type of defiance in the midst of resistance. Beauty is found in the overlap. Overlap isn't static. Overlap is fluid, responsive movement. Beauty is constantly passing away, but also the hope of the world, for in its passing we find an impression, wound, arrow, symbol, pointing to the possibility of more. I'm guessing beauty is always looking to dialogue with us, though I'm not sure we're always looking to dialogue with beauty. There's just so much damn monologue. Monologue has never really been that interested in beauty. Beauty is shy, invitational, luring, erotic, lives in curves more than corners, whispers more than shouts, delay more than dispatch. Morality serves a purpose, knowledge does its thing, and truth is important. But in the end, and all the endings after that, beauty is the longing. I have lived this way for quite some time, but it's only been in recent years living as I have with so much absence that I've gained the language or confidence or arrogance to offer my suspicions publicly, which is to say, beauty is truth more than truth is truth.
Well, thank you so much. I read your entire book, and I found it so beautiful. I mean, it's heartbreaking. It's so many things. And you use the word beauty quite a bit in that last part. Beauty is not a word that we associate with death and grief, but it seems like you really explored the concept of beauty. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, thank you. Beauty has become really, really important to me. When I was younger, when I was a pastor, I realized at some point that, and I've been a pastor most of my life up until a couple of years ago, but I realized at one point that because I have artistry background, and that I was paying attention to art, and I was like, oh, the kind of art that I like with music, for example, is always full of like suspended chords and sevenths and ninths and all these extra harmonics and stuff. Um, but my theology that I had been brought up with, and by the way, there was a lot of good things about what I was brought up with, more good than bad. But but of course, we always have to talk about the bad some. And the bad part was that the theology was it wasn't interested in suspended chords. Everything was like C major, you got three chords to a song and that's it. And so I started, it's funny, like in my late 20s, and some of you were doing this way before then, but I just started thinking about what I liked in art, and then I would just like superimpose it over into my theology. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense. Like maybe God's an artist, and there's really something very beautiful about how when things don't go quite right, it doesn't mean I want them to not go quite right. I'm not trying to do that. But maybe if God's an artist, all that beauty could be woven together to something really good. And I started looking at people. I started looking at my own life as a song and other people as songs and all of us as like this symphony. And it's really something. That was way, way, way before I ever read anything in process or open and relational theology. So it was a lot of fun 20 years later to read Whitehead say something like beauty is the harmonization of diversity. And then you think about diversity, and I use the word loosely, but it's all this agitation and suspension and problems and darkness and pain. All of that somehow without saying that I would never say it's okay that the bad stuff has happened, but all of that somehow is something to be thankful for, and has definitely made my life. It's invited me to go in a direction that where my life is now just like it's so much richer, and it's so stinking beautiful, but it's also it's also really, really hard. So that's a rambling response to your question about beauty.
That's okay. I think that is a perfect response. So in reading your book, and I'm a poet too, and actually I think it really resonated with me because what I do with all of my grief and all of my uncomfortable feelings is I write poetry.
Hmm.
And so I could totally understand this book. And also I was so interested in the order in which you wrote the book, because it was I think on page 33, when you get to the poem, it's called She's, and then Been Removed. Page 71. Let's see. And then no, Late, page 33. That's the one where you really get to what happened. And but you start out with just feelings about being a dad and descriptions of her, which are so beautiful. And I think that's what you have to do at first, almost, is before you can get into that deep pain, is you have to write around it and write about the memories. Does that make sense? And did you write, did you write it in the order that it appears?
Pretty much. It is, as all of us know who write, you by the time you're done with it, you have written and rewritten it multiple times. In fact, I always tell writers, the writing, or people want to be writers, the writing part's not hard. It's the rewriting. The rewriting is really hard because that's all you wind up doing, really. So I hesitate to say that initially it went all in this direction. However, as much as anything else I've ever written, yes, it was somewhat stream of consciousness like, and I really knew from the beginning that it needed to be something that I would read, and I knew it would be on audio anyhow. And so I just wrote it like I would read it in a very kind of controlled kind of a way, because I'm trying to control the intensity of the emotion that obviously is so intense at times. So to the degree that it was a conscious decision to try to talk about her a little bit first and introduce the reader to who she was, I don't know. But I think you're right. I think based on, well, there's no right or wrong with poetry, but I think based on the feedback on what you're saying, like somehow it set it up well. By the way, I just got this last week, How to Read a Poem and Fall in Love with Poetry by Edward Hirsch. What a beautiful book that is. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think setting it up before, and because most people, when they pick it up, I mean, this is what the book looks like. It's very minimalist, but it's got grief in the title, and they're going to read the back, and so they probably have a pretty good idea that something bad's happened, and maybe even that I lost my daughter. So it didn't feel right to just start with that. So yeah.
And did you, because sometimes when I'm writing in grief, I don't know what I'm going to say, and the words surprise me. And then I'm able to say, yeah, that's how I feel. And it's like the words give you permission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that about writing in general. And even if you're not a professional writer, you might be a journalist or something like that. I think that's part of what it serves. But for me, when I sit down it's the computer screen, obviously, most of the time or all the time, and I'm moving words around on the page, I feel like I'm playing existential Tetris. This block moves here and here. And sometimes it's about the words, and sometimes I'm convinced that there's something neurological that's happening with my eyes and what's going on the screen as I move stuff around. I feel like stuff's moving around in my soul. Well, then you add to that the kinds of things that all of us write about, and certainly in this book, the kinds of things I'm writing about. It was the act of writing itself was unbelievably important. For all that reason, and plus I'll just add one more, which is, and I kind of already alluded to this, but with grief in particular, the pain is so intense. It's such an out of control feeling, because it is out of control. You cannot control it. I'm convinced that part of the reason that I like to write is because it is a way that I order the chaos in my world, and I don't think that's a bad, like that's a nice little kind of like nod to maybe what the creator, he or she, is doing, trying to weave all of this, weave something good out of the chaos. And so writing has been that way for me. It's a little bit, without trying to control it, it's a way I kind of domesticate the wildness, and it's incredibly important. And my wife reminds me, when I haven't sold very many books in the last couple of weeks, she's like, look, it's not about that. It's about what it does for your soul. And I'm like, thank you, wife. You're right. It's true. It's super, super important for me.
Yeah. And you know what I think is so important for people to understand is, this was your way of going through the grief. Whenever we're grieving, if we're going to have a healthy outcome, we have to go into the grief. There is no way around it. And if it's writing, whatever way you find to do it, if you go through the grief, the grief changes. It doesn't go away. It never, you can't undo what's been done. You always have that missing piece, but you have to go through that acute grief so that you can get to a place where you can have those memories and you can smile and you can say, let me tell you who my daughter is, because she still exists in your heart. There are things about her. And do you feel, and this will be the last question so you can get on and read some other poems, but do you feel that people don't ask enough and that you wish that they would ask about her?
That's a great question. I kind of do. I mean, I wouldn't want anyone to feel bad about that, but like both my partner and I, my wife and I, her mom, we never don't like talking about her. I mean, that's never happened once, and especially we have two other kids, two boys, and now they have girls, and a brand new granddaughter who's a month old, so she's not talking yet about it, but I never have a problem talking about it. I mean, sometimes I might get choked up, but I'm always happy to talk about it because it's a way to keep that relationship alive in a particular way. So now I don't get the sense that that's probably true with everyone, and I think there are some people who they don't ever want to talk about the thing again. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but you asked the question of me, and I would say no, I don't have a problem talking about my kid. She was amazing. And I would just comment also in the first part of what you said before you asked that regarding going through it. Yes, I couldn't agree more. There is no going around. I mean, it's true with everything in life, really. There's really no going around. There's only going through. And of course, it's super painful. And of course, it's easier said than done. And I would never want to coerce anyone, because if you can't do it, you can't do it. The only thing would be to just, encourage people to face that thing, because that thing at some level it's probably influencing you quite a bit. Yeah. Like we often say, the thing, like the thing you want to go see your counselor about, it's never about the thing. It's always about the thing underneath the thing. So to try to get to those things underneath the things, which is the job of writers and poets and artists and hopefully theologians and pastors, all that, which I serve all in kind of all those capacities. So yeah, I'm kind of honored to do that. You want me to read a little more?
Yes, please.
All right, I shall. I can read other stuff too, but I had just told Kat before we started that I'd pick it up kind of middle of the book. So I'm going to read a chapter called Music, and then one called Listening, and then one simply called She's, SHE''S. Music was a big part of our girls' life, church, school, in the car, with brothers. I suppose there's nothing I miss more than hearing her and the boys sing random songs in the living room. Having kids harmonize is the best. Music was a refuge, a way to interact with all the stuff she was feeling, a way to process life. And not hearing her sing is painful. Hearing so much silence is deafening. I've scrolled through her phone searching for recordings, flipped through her notebooks looking for lyrics, just trying to find something to recapture the music, but it never quite works. The music I have found, the songs she has finished, is comforting. But the music she didn't finish, recordings that stop awkwardly, lyrics that trail off at the end of the page, none of that is comforting. And then I spend rest of the day wondering what line she would have written next to finish the song. And whatever sense of gratitude I have about her music is overwhelmed by the sense of pain I have about her unfinished music. And then I spend rest of the week wondering what she would have done in her life. And whatever sense of gratitude I have about the person she was is overwhelmed by the sense of pain I have about the person she was becoming. She was an unfinished song. Sometimes when people are over and she and the boys aren't singing, I want to raise my hand, quiet the room, and say, wait, can you hear that? Can you hear the music not playing? Listening to music that's not playing is weird. She isn't singing, but the space she used to occupy has its own kind of sound. I remember learning about negative space, which is an approach to art that interacts with emptiness in the background, the role it plays, the way it shares an edge with the subject in painting, photograph, design. The emptiness might be an imprint or an outline, a trace or track, but its presence is not incidental. Reflect upon a piece of art incorporating negative space long enough, and you realize extra stuff is going on. After a while, you think, maybe the subject isn't the subject without the empty part. A while longer, you think, maybe the subject is the empty part. About 3 days later, you think, wait, maybe empty parts aren't empty. Sounds about right. She's been removed by the event, but something's there in the eventing. Eventing is living in the wake of the event, like humans on side of a mountain in wake of colossal storm. More than storm itself, this eventing is depth of silence on back end of such an ungovernable force. It's the smallness after the bigness. It's the stunning realization of how utterly wild everything can be. Stunning realization of how utterly wild everything actually is. Venting is grieving. Grieving is never clearly defined, named, closed, put away, separated from everything else. Grieving is mountain, thunder, sky, brilliant storm, human, terrible hope, entanglement. Grieving isn't something to be ignored so one can get on with the living. Rather, grieving is the wrenching between thing gone, person, idea, dream, relationship, hope, life, and new thing longing to arrive, person, idea, dream, relationship, hope, life. Grieving is death, decay, compost, brilliant, irreparable resignation, and also emergence. Grieving is procreative. Grieving is living. Blessed are those interested in living. Grieving is an honest living. Blessed are those interested in honesty. More than truth-telling, honesty might be a kind of internal structural integrity. Owning the sadness isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of internal structural integrity. Not saying this is exactly how all this must be done, but I've never been interested in separating grief from life. Never been interested in bottling sadness, like bottling peaches to store in the basement, to be retrieved from time to time when one is ready to consume peaches, when the peaches are ready to be consumed. Doing that, like denying the sadness, doesn't feel genuine. Plus, seems like I do irreparable damage to my insides, my spleen or something, holding all that inside. So I do my best to slip behind closed doors, try not to make a scene in public spaces, but I do not back down from grieving. Again, not saying what anyone else has to do, not trying to make others feel bad about not grieving or not showing emotion or not using words that so easily trip little detonations of sadness. Because honestly, I think everyone's just got to figure out their own way. No, I'm not interested in shaming, only to give you freedom from anyone or anything possibly shaming you about grieving. And also to say that if you identify as male, that you likely suck at this. Whether you do grieving in public or private, I don't know. I only know you must learn how to allow the sadness. Remember watching the movie Wind River. The show plays out against the backdrop of Wyoming wilderness, fatherhood. The main character, familiar with loss, finds his friend Martin, who just lost a daughter, says, I'd like to tell you it gets easier, but it doesn't. If there's any comfort, it's getting used to the pain, I suppose. I went to a grief seminar in Casper. Did you know that? I don't know why. I just wanted the bad to go away. I wanted answers to questions that couldn't be answered. Then the main character looks up at the mountains and continues. The counselor comes up to me after the seminar and sat down next to me, and he said something that stuck with me. I don't know if it's what he said or how he said it. He says, I got some good news and I got some bad news. The bad news is you're never going to be the same. You're never going to be whole, not ever again. You lost your daughter and nothing's ever going to replace that. Now, the good news is, as soon as you accept that and you let yourself suffer, you'll allow yourself to visit her in your mind and you'll remember all the love she gave, all the joy she knew. And then the main character looks straight at his friend who's just lost his daughter, says, point is, Martin, you can't steer from the pain. If you do, you'll rob yourself. You'll rob yourself of every memory of her, every last one. from her first step to her last smile. It'll kill them all. Just take the pain, Martin. You hear me? You take it. It's the only way you'll keep her with you. Sounds about right.
That was the poem that I highlighted
Mm.
so much. First, I want to address the music because that really resonated with me. When my uncle died, he had been a DJ, and he gave me so many lessons about music. And I just want to read the last 3 lines of a poem I wrote about him when he died. And it was, I won't let you go as long as I can remember you like a song.
That's
And it's
nice.
in those things that hold the memories. We never know what little sparks hold memories, but I might hear a song like Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, which is
Yeah.
a song I remember him playing when I was a little kid. And there's nothing, that ties him to that song, but it's just a memory.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, music can really, really bring the emotions. But the poem, She's, um, the movie quotes, boy, are those true,
Mm.
aren't they?
Yeah.
About you, I got some good news and some bad news.
Mm-hmm.
The bad news is you're never going to be the same. And then there's the things, I wanted to talk about kind of our discomfort with grief
Mm.
in this culture, and the awkward things that people say, um, maybe the ways that did you find people avoiding you at a certain point?
I think they still do for probably maybe multiple reasons. Then my theology shifted so much, people definitely wanted to avoid me.
Yeah.
But what you're probably asking specifically, yes, I've had so much stinking loss in my life. Unfortunately, my daughter, it's not the only, it's probably served to be the most intense, but there's just been so much that I have gathered after a while. And I don't really blame people. They're just like, I think something's wrong with this guy. Like there's just something that's not quite right. And so that's all been a part of it. And the changing friendships in the midst of grief, because certain people cannot. I mean, I get it. I try not to be overly. I don't want to shame anyone, but um, what I reckon, I think I may even say this in Indigo somewhere. I recognized at some point. I don't know if this is what you asked, but this is what I'm thinking of. That the intensity of my loss was really reminding people of the intensity of their loss. And a lot of people are not just they're not ready to deal with that. And so, when we all just mirror each other's desires and wants and thoughts, and um, at very deep levels. And so when you're someone who's been through a lot, and especially when you've decided that you're not going to circumvent it, and by the way, get around it. And by the way, I'm not trying to sound cool when I say that. Like for me, it felt like really the only viable thing I could do. Number one, I was a father in this case, and it was like, no, I have a responsibility, to take the pain, Martin, like in the movie Wind River. I don't know, maybe that's an over masculine way, but it felt like, no, as a dad, I need to do that. But I was also a pastor at the time, and I was a pastor. My 2 boys were still at home, and then a bunch of college kids who all knew my kid. My kid was 20 when she died, and they were all a part of it. And I had nieces and nephews. Like I felt this like responsibility to really have intellectual honesty with what I was dealing with. And so I was in it, man. And I was like real time on Sundays. My theology was shifting, and those poor people that showed up to church had to really feel it. And some of them just they couldn't, and I didn't even blame them. Like this stuff is so intense. But yeah, it affected friendships. It affected there's nothing that it hasn't affected. It's affected everything at a deep level. for good or for bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, a loss like that changes you.
Yeah.
You're not the same. You can't be the same.
No.
And so there's discomfort with that, but then there's also the discomfort with the grief.
Mhm.
And, you know, I attended a death this morning, an elderly gentleman, and the daughter was there, and she shared that, you know, she has to fly back home and get back to work. And she said, life goes on. We don't we don't allow for the time that we need for grief. You
Right.
can't grieve in 3 days and have it be over, and especially if you lose a child.
Mhm.
That I don't think the grief ever ends. It changes, but um, you need you need time to
Mhm.
work through that, and you need support,
Mhm.
and you need to talk about your daughter.
Mhm.
And you know, I'm glad that you wrote the book because you shared about her and you captured an essence of her in this book.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so I want to ask you, I love how you call her our girl,
Mm,
but I want to ask you to speak her name and
sure.
then tell me something, anything, just something wonderful about her.
Yeah. Yeah. Her name was Quincy Lynn Foster. And our granddaughter just born, her middle name is Lynn as well. So that's kind of sweet. Quincy was wild and undomesticated is the word I use a lot with her. She was a wild woman from day one. Lot of fun and a lot of energy. When she was about 2 years old, I distinctly remember having the thought, "Oh my, I cannot control this girl. I can't control this." Now, I mean, you know, I was a first time dad, and you for a little bit you think maybe you can kind of uh, I mean, at best, I guided her at best, but no. And then I remember thinking, I can't control her. My next thought was, I must never let her know that I cannot control her, because then it would be really bad. But we lived in Scottsdale, Arizona at the time. And in the wintertime, I remember, you know, we'd have the windows open because it would be so nice there. And we were in an apartment. We were church planners. And so we were in an apartment. And when she would get in trouble, she started as soon as she got the sense that she'd get in trouble, she would start running through the apartment yelling, somebody help me, somebody help me. And she did this enough that my partner and we kind of like would have to make little eye signal, because we would run and we'd make sure the doors were closed and the windows were down for fear that someone would call child protection services on us, just because we wanted to go, you know, discipline her and put her in timeout. So she took all that energy. Her entire life she was like that. Fortunately, you know, over the years she was able to dial it in a little bit, but she played soccer and she was a musician, and she loved Haiti. She went to Haiti. She was only there for 1 week, but it changed her life. And then subsequently, that's a whole nother thing we can talk about if we want, but it's changed our lives. We started a nonprofit down there shortly after she died, and that's been going for 9 years and is a wild and crazy ride. But yeah, she was never dull. It was never a dull moment. She was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. And so, you know, just for everyone, whenever you know someone who has had a loss, just ask them about the person they lost. Say, tell me something. And that's what I do when I attend a death, when I see that people are really, you know, they're shocked and crying. And then I have them get in a circle around the the body. We pray. And then I always say, tell me something delightful about grandpa, or tell me
Mm,
something wonderful about mom. And
mhm,
then all of a sudden the smiles. And it's not that, you know, we want the grief to go away, but I want them to know that there's also the wonderful person that existed, and we want to remember that. And I love how you captured so much of that in your book.
mm. That's nice. Thank you.
One thing I wanted to throw out there is just that decades ago, when I was going through a really rough period, I hadn't experienced someone's death, but just a really, really rough period. Someone recommended the book to me, or I somehow found it, How to Survive the Loss of a Love.
Mm.
And that book is like a standard issue. At least it used to be around grief, and I've given it to many people. But it's also a lot of poetry. It's not just, it's like it's three authors, and one is the poet. I think the other two were not, but there's a lot of poetry in it, and so I just, that was such a beautiful, beautiful book, and I see yours in the same light.
Yeah, it's interesting with the poetry piece of it. I mean, I don't always call this poetry because for some people they don't know that they just think of poetry like roses are red, violets are blue, right? It's stuff that rhymes. This doesn't
Yeah.
rhyme. It's more of a lyrical kind of free flowing poetic thing to it. But yeah, there's something about art that opens us up in ways that facts and black and white stuff doesn't. Um, my friend Tim, he's one of the blurbs on the back. He used this phrase, aesthetic arrest.
Mm,
He said that's what happened to him when he read the book.
mm,
Aesthetic arrest, like he wasn't. It just indirectly it came out of nowhere. He didn't plan on it, but this beauty just kind of captured him. And then you know how it is, like whether you're watching a movie or if you're with your partner at a nice dinner or poetry or you're listening to a song, when that aesthetic arrest, when beauty captures your heart, it's the best, man. And then you're open to it's also the worst because then you're really vulnerable and you're open. So yeah, there's something about the art of it that is very important.
yeah. One more thing I want to say, and then we can open it up to other questions, Jonathan, is that one part of the book, I mean, I found the whole book very, very moving, but one part that just was like, oh, was that part about when you talked about the soccer game.
Mm,
That just, and your interaction with your daughter that you regretted.
yeah.
And it was just a beautiful vulnerability that you shared, and I just really appreciated your willingness to not only share your grief, which is vulnerable enough, but then this moment of maybe regret, or however you perceive that.
Yeah, that was I don't have a lot of regrets. Like talk about how what might be more important to be able to say about a relationship with your kid than to say I don't have a lot of regrets. I'm like it was really hard because she was a very challenging person, but I don't have a lot of regrets. But yeah, that's one I definitely remember. And right, I'll just tell the story real quick. But yeah, she had played a soccer tournament over the weekend. She was 10, and so I remember writing when she was 10, thinking, "Oh my God, that's midlife." Midlife for her was age 10. That was just a weird experience in that moment. And so yeah, she played 4 games. She didn't play very well. She didn't play with the intensity like when I talked earlier about her intensity. She normally brought that to the soccer field, and when she did, she played really well, and she didn't that weekend, and that was very frustrating to me. And so all the other parents are leaving after the 4th game. I drag her back out onto the field, which is not the best move. Um, and I can still picture those parents driving off and them kind of looking at me and looking over the shoulder, and that was so they're all gone, and me and Quincy stayed behind, and we kicked and dribbled. And I say in the book, we kicked and we ran and we dribbled with all the expectations, because that's really what it was. It really didn't have anything to do with anything other than dad's expectations. So we get in the car and we're driving home, and I realized at that point I'd pushed her a little much, and I see a tear out of the corner or coming down her cheek, and I said, "Hey, babe, I'm really sorry." And then she goes, "It's okay, Dad. I know you're just trying to make me better." And I'm like, "Oh my word, you're not supposed to be that." So that's smart. So Yeah, that messes me up because I hate that that happened. But then also that in that moment, she was like way wiser than the father. So pretty amazing. So yeah, thanks for referencing that.